Imagine for a moment that you could see everyone's soul, not metaphorically, but literally. Every person you pass on the street would glow with an inner light, a warmth that connects them to something greater than themselves. You would see the threads of psychic energy that bind humanity together in an invisible web of consciousness, stretching across the galaxy and touching the vast ocean of the Imperium itself. Every human being, every living thing, possesses this spark, this connection to the warp that makes them fundamentally real in a way that transcends mere physical existence. Now imagine that you possess no such light. You are a void, a hole in reality where that connection should be. You are not simply disconnected from the warp. You actively repel it, push it away, create a bubble of silence in a universe that screams with psychic energy. You are a blank, a pariah, an untouchable. You are a soul rejected by the very fabric of the immaterial universe, and in the grim darkness of the far future, there is perhaps no fate more isolating, no existence more fundamentally wrong. This is what it means to be rejected by the warp in Warhammer 40,000. This is the story of those rare individuals born with the so-called pariah gene, a genetic anomaly so rare that perhaps only 1 or 2 exist on a planet of 10 billion souls. Some worlds go centuries without seeing a single one born, and those who are born into this state of non-being often die young, victims of the very thing that makes them unique. They are killed not by violence alone, though that comes often enough, but by the simple fact that every living thing in the universe instinctively recognizes them as wrong, as other, as something that should not exist. The horror of being a blank is not the horror of monsters or demons. It is the horror of fundamental isolation, of being forever separated from the basic experience of existence that every other sentient being shares. It is the horror of looking into someone's eyes and seeing not recognition or understanding, but revulsion and fear that they cannot explain or control. It is the horror of knowing that no matter how hard you try, no matter how good or kind or worthy you attempt to be, every person you meet will hate you on an instinctive level that bypasses all reason and consciousness. In the Imperium of man, where ignorance and superstition rule the minds of trillions, where psychers are both feared and necessary, where the warp is both mankind's greatest tool and its most terrible enemy, the blank exists in a twilight state. They are weapons against the powers of chaos, living shields against demonic corruption, the only truly reliable defense against possession and psychic assault. Yet they are also outcasts, pariahs in both name and nature, shunned even by those who understand and value their abilities. To understand what it truly means to be rejected by the warp, we must first understand what the warp is, what it means to have a soul in the universe of Warhammer 40,000, and why the absence of that connection is so fundamentally terrifying. We must walk through the life of a blank from birth to death, experiencing the isolation, the pain, the rare moments of purpose, and the constant struggle to find meaning in an existence that the universe itself seems designed to reject. We must explore the organizations that hunt for these individuals, the ways they are used as weapons, and the question of what, if anything, awaits them after death in a cosmos where souls are consumed by hungry gods. This is not a story of glory or heroism in the traditional sense. This is a story of survival against odds that most cannot comprehend, of finding purpose in rejection, and of the terrible price paid by those who serve as humanity's shield against the darkness of the warp. This is the story of what it means to be nothing in a universe where everything else is connected to something greater, the warp and the nature of the soul. To understand what it means to be rejected by the warp, we must first understand what the warp truly is, and what role it plays in the existence of every living thing in the galaxy. The warp, also known as the Immaterium, the Empyrean, or the Sea of Souls, is not simply another dimension or a parallel universe. It is the realm of thought and emotion given form, a mirror that reflects the psychic energy of all sentient life in the Imperium. Every thought, every feeling, every dream and nightmare of every living creature creates ripples in the warp, contributing to its ever-changing currents and tides. In the universe of Warhammer 40,000, the warp is simultaneously mankind's greatest asset and its most terrible threat. It is through the warp that ships travel faster than light, punching through the barrier between real space and the Imperium to traverse distances that would take millions of years at sublight speeds. It is through the warp that astropaths communicate across the Kinkohn, void of space, sending messages that would otherwise take generations to arrive. The Emperor's Astronomicon, that great psychic beacon burning on terror, shines through the warp to guide humanity's ships through its treacherous currents. Without the warp, the Imperium would collapse overnight, its million worlds isolated and alone in the dark. But the warp is also hell made manifest. It is the home of demons, those creatures of pure emotion and malevolence that feed on the souls of the living. It is the domain of the chaos gods, those vast and terrible entities born from millennia of war, disease, excess, and manipulation. Khorne, the blood god, exists because of rage and violence. Nurgle, the plague father, is sustained by despair and the acceptance of decay. Slaanesh, the dark prince, was literally born from the excesses of the Eldari race, their fall creating a wound in reality that devoured their empire and their gods. Tzenk, the architect of fate, thrives on hope, ambition, and the desire for change. These gods and their servants hunger for the souls of mortals, and every psychic event, every emotion, every death feeds them. The connection between the Imperium and the Immaterium is the soul. Every sentient being, from the lowliest human to the mightiest space marine, from the craft worlders of the Eldari to the savage orcs, possesses what various cultures call a soul, but which might be better understood as a psychic presence in the warp. This presence is not separate from the physical being, but is instead an essential aspect of consciousness itself. When you think, when you feel, when you experience existence, you are creating ripples in the warp. Your soul is the part of you that touches the Immaterium, and through that touch, you are connected to all other souls in the galaxy. For most humans, this connection is weak and unconscious. They cannot perceive the warp directly, cannot manipulate its energies, or sense the thoughts of others. But the connection exists nonetheless. It is what makes them feel joy and sorrow, hope and despair. It is what gives meaning to their existence beyond mere biological function. It is what, in many interpretations, allows them to exist at all in any meaningful sense. When a normal human dies, their soul enters the warp, where it is typically consumed by the chaotic energies that swirl through that realm, torn apart and absorbed by daemons, or simply dissolved into the churning sea of emotion and thought. Psykers are different. They possess a stronger connection to the warp, one powerful enough that they can consciously perceive and manipulate its energies. A Psyker's soul blazes in the Immaterium, like a torch in the darkness, bright and hot and attractive to every daemon and predator that dwells in that realm. This is why unsanctioned Psykers are so dangerous. Without training and discipline, without the rituals and wards that protect the sanctioned Psykers of the Imperium, a Psyker is a doorway waiting to be opened. Their bright soul draws demonic attention, and all it takes is one moment of weakness, one lapse in concentration, for a demon to punch through the barrier between real space and the warp, using the Psyker as an anchor point for manifestation. The Eldari understand this better than humanity. Their entire civilization was nearly destroyed by their connection to the warp, their excess and pleasure-seeking creating the youngest and perhaps most terrible of the Chaos Gods. Now they protect their souls with spirit stones, devices that capture their psychic essence at the moment of death to prevent Slaanesh from devouring them. The Eldari soul is so bright, so powerful, that without this protection, every Eldari who dies is immediately consumed by she who thirsts, experiencing torments beyond mortal comprehension for all eternity. Even species that seem to have no connection to the warp still possess something that touches that realm. The orcs generate a gestalt psychic field that makes their impossible technology work and allows their wah energy to grow as more orcs gather together. The Tyranids possess the hive mind, a vast psychic intelligence that spans billions of organisms and connects them across light years of space. Only the Necrons, those ancient beings who traded their souls to the Citan in the time before humanity's first civilizations, truly exist without any connection to the warp, and they are not alive in any meaningful sense, merely consciousnesses imprisoned in deathless metal bodies. This is the universe in which blanks exist. This is the cosmos where every living thing, from the smallest insect to the mightiest primarch, possesses a soul that touches the warp and connects them to the fundamental nature of existence itself. The warp is not simply a place or a dimension. It is part of what it means to be alive, to be conscious, to be real. It is the immaterial reflection of material existence, the place where thought and feeling take on substance and power. And then there are the blanks, those rare individuals who possess no such connection. They do not simply lack a soul in the traditional sense. They are not merely disconnected from the warp. They are antithetical to it. Their very existence creates a void in the fabric of the Imperium, a null space where the warp cannot reach, where psychic energy is not simply absent, but actively negated. In a universe where consciousness and the warp are fundamentally linked, where to think and feel is to touch the realm of souls, the blank exists in a state that should be impossible. Imagine trying to see someone who creates a bubble of blindness around them. Not darkness, not shadow, but the complete absence of vision itself. That is what a blank appears as to those who can perceive the warp. To a psyker, a blank is a hole in reality, a gap in the fundamental fabric of existence. They are not invisible, but they are wrong in a way that transcends normal perception. They are a black hole in a universe of light, and everything about them screams danger and wrongness to any being with even the slightest psychic sensitivity. This is the foundation upon which we must build our understanding of what it means to be rejected by the warp. The blank does not simply lack a connection to the immaterium. They negate it. They push it away. They create a sphere of silence in a universe that resonates with psychic energy. And because of this fundamental wrongness, because they exist in opposition to the very nature of consciousness itself, they are hated, not through choice or reason, but through an instinct so deep that it precedes thought itself. The biology and nature of blanks. The source of a blank's nature has been the subject of intense study and wild speculation throughout the Imperium's long history. The common term for this condition is the pariah gene, though this name is somewhat misleading. Exhaustive research by the Adeptus, Mechanicus and the Imperial Archaeotechnologist Corps during the early years of the Great Crusade attempted to isolate a single genetic marker responsible for the blank condition, but these efforts not only failed to find such a gene, they resulted in disasters terrible enough that the Emperor himself decreed a moratorium on all further research into the biological basis of the psychic null phenomena. What the fragmentary records that survived these failed experiments suggest is far more complex and far more disturbing than a simple genetic mutation. The pariah gene, if it exists at all, is not a single gene, but rather a complex interaction of multiple genetic factors, environmental influences, and perhaps something else entirely, something that touches on the fundamental nature of reality itself. Some theories suggest that the condition is the result of experiments conducted during the Dark Age of technology, that ancient age of wonders and horrors when humanity's mastery of science reached heights never since equaled. Other theories point to Xenos tampering, suggesting that some alien race deliberately seeded this trait into humanity's genome for their own inscrutable purposes. The most disturbing theory, and one that has gained credence in certain circles of the Inquisition and the Mechanicus, is that the pariah gene was deliberately introduced into human genetics by the Necrons themselves, those ancient Xenos who fought the war in heaven millions of years before humanity even existed. According to this theory, the Necrons, in their war against the Old Ones and their psychic servant races, created the pariah gene as a weapon against the warp itself. They abducted early humans, perhaps when we were still primitive creatures, barely recognizable as the species we would become, and genetically modified us to carry this trait. Then they released us back into the wild, allowing the gene to spread through natural reproduction, creating a time-delayed weapon that would activate millions of years in the future when humanity had spread across the stars. Whether this theory is true or not, what is certain is that blanks are extraordinarily rare. On a typical Imperial world with a population of 10 billion souls, perhaps only 1 or 2 individuals will be born with the pariah gene. Many worlds go centuries without a single blank being born. This rarity is compounded by the fact that most blanks die young, victims of the very condition that makes them unique. They are killed by frightened parents who cannot understand why they feel such revulsion toward their own child. They are murdered by communities who sense something fundamentally wrong about them. They are driven into the wilderness or the underhive, where they perish from exposure, starvation, or violence. The few who survive to adulthood do so through a combination of luck, stubbornness, and the development of coping mechanisms that allow them to navigate a world that instinctively hates them. Not all blanks are created equal. The condition exists on a spectrum, much like psychic ability itself. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica uses a scale called the assignment to measure psychic potential, with normal humans registering somewhere in the middle, weak psychers at the higher end, and powerful psychers at the very top. Blanks occupy the opposite end of this scale, the negative numbers that represent not the presence of psychic power, but its absence. A weak blank, someone at the 5+ level of the scale, might not even realize they possess the condition. They simply find that people are uncomfortable around them for reasons no one can quite explain. They have trouble making friends, romantic relationships fail for nebulous reasons, and they often end up in professions that require minimal human contact. These weak blanks might go their entire lives without understanding why they are so isolated, attributing their loneliness to personal failings rather than to the fundamental wrongness of their existence. As we move down the scale, the effect becomes more pronounced. A blank at the psi- level creates a noticeable sense of unease in those around them. Normal humans will make excuses to leave their presence. Psychers will feel physically uncomfortable, as if standing too close to a source of heat or cold. The blank themselves will struggle to maintain any kind of normal social life, finding that every interaction is colored by an undercurrent of hostility and fear that they cannot dispel, no matter how friendly or harmless they attempt to be. At the lowest end of the scale are the omega- blanks, individuals whose anti-psychic presence is so powerful that they create a sphere of warp negation around themselves. These are the individuals sought after by the Calexis Temple and the Sisters of Silence, the rarest of the rare, so powerful that they can shut down psychic abilities completely within their area of effect. To a normal human, an omega-, blank is almost impossible to look at directly. The mind simply refuses to acknowledge their presence, sliding away from the perception like water from oil. To a psyker, an omega- blank is a howling void, a wound in reality that causes physical pain to perceive. To a demon, they are anathema incarnate, beings whose very existence is torture. The mechanism by which blanks negate the warp is not fully understood, even by the greatest minds of the Mechanicus. What is known is that their brains somehow generate a negative psychic field, an anti-energy that does not simply block the warp, but actively pushes it away. This field extends outward from the blank in a sphere, its radius determined by the strength of the individual's condition. Within this sphere, psychic phenomena are suppressed or completely nullified. Psykers find their powers weakened or useless. Demons experience what can only be described as pain, their immaterial forms destabilized by proximity to something that should not exist. Even the tyrannid hive mind is disrupted by proximity to a powerful blank, the psychic synapses that connect individual organisms to the greater whole, severed or weakened. But the effects of a blank extend beyond the merely psychic. There is something about them that affects all living things, even those with no psychic sensitivity whatsoever. This is because, according to one theory, all living things possess at least some minimal connection to the warp. The spark of consciousness, the thing that separates a thinking being from a mere automaton, requires some touch of the immaterium. When confronted with a blank, when that minimal psychic sense encounters the void that surrounds them, the conscious mind reacts with instinctive revulsion. This revulsion manifests in different ways depending on the observer. Normal humans might rationalize it, convincing themselves that the blank has poor hygiene, or an unpleasant personality, or some other mundane failing that explains the discomfort they feel. They might invent reasons to dislike the blank, finding fault with everything they do, interpreting innocent actions as threatening or suspicious. This rationalization is the mind's attempt to make sense of an instinctive response that has no logical basis, to provide a reason for a feeling that comes from deep in the hindbrain, from the part of consciousness that touches the warp and recoils from its negation. For psykers, there is no possibility of rationalization. The presence of a blank is physical pain and existential horror combined. Imagine that your entire life you have been able to hear a background hum, a constant presence that you barely notice because it has always been there. This hum is the psychic energy of the universe, the background radiation of consciousness itself. Now imagine that someone walks into the room and suddenly that hum is not just silenced, but replaced with a howling void that pulls at you, that threatens to swallow you whole. This is what a psyker experiences in the presence of a blank. Their powers are suppressed or negated, yes, but beyond that, they feel as if a fundamental part of their being is being torn away, crushed, destroyed. The strongest-willed psykers can resist the urge to flee or attack, can force themselves to remain in the presence of a blank through sheer discipline and training, but the discomfort never fades, never becomes tolerable. It is always there, a constant assault on the very core of their being. For demons and other entities of the warp, a blank is not merely uncomfortable or painful, they are impossible. Demons exist as beings of pure warp energy, creatures that have no material form except that which they create for themselves by forcing their essence into real space. When a demon encounters a blank, it encounters something that should not be possible. A space where the warp does not exist, where they cannot exist. The pain a demon experiences in proximity to a blank has been described in various texts as worse than any torment that can be inflicted in the material realm. It is the pain of non-existence, of being forced to confront the possibility of absolute annihilation. Most demons will flee from a blank rather than endure this agony. Those who cannot flee, who are bound by ritual or compulsion to remain, experience what might be called madness, though applying such a term to creatures that are already incarnations of chaos seems almost redundant. Even the Necrons, those soulless beings who have existed without any connection to the warp for 60 million years, find blanks useful. Though the Necrons themselves cannot be affected by psychic powers due to their purely material nature, they recognize the value of blanks as weapons against their ancient enemies, the Eldari and other psychic races. In the distant past, before the current Necron Codex retconned much of their lore, it was said that the Necrons created beings called Necron, pariahs, by capturing human blanks and subjecting them to the same biotransference process that had turned the Necrontyr into the Necrons. These pariahs were beings of horrible perfection, combining the deathless metal bodies of the Necrons with the warp-negating abilities of blanks, creating warriors that were anathema to all psychic life. The physical appearance of a blank is no different from that of any other human. They possess no identifying marks, no physical deformities that would set them apart from the general population. A blank could stand next to a normal human, and without any psychic sensitivity, you would not be able to tell them apart by sight alone. This normalcy makes their condition all the more insidious. They look like they should belong, like they should be just another member of the human race. But the moment they come into proximity with another sentient being, that illusion is shattered. The wrongness is not visible, but it is felt all the same. This is the nature of the blank, the biology and metaphysics of their condition. They are humans who, through some quirk of genetics or cosmic design, exist in opposition to the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. They are voids in a universe of light, absences in a cosmos of presence, creatures who should not be able to exist and yet do. And because they exist in this state of impossible wrongness, because their very being is an affront to the natural order of the warp and the materium, they are hated, not through choice, not through malice, but through an instinct so deep and so powerful that it overrides all reason, all compassion, all attempts at understanding. The social horror, a life of isolation. To be born a blank is to be born into isolation so profound that it makes solitary confinement seem like a crowded party. From the very first moments of consciousness, from infancy through childhood and into whatever adulthood a blank might survive to see, their existence is defined by rejection. Not the rejection of enemies or rivals, not the natural conflict of competing interests or ideologies, but the fundamental rejection that comes from being perceived as wrong by every living thing that encounters them. For a blank child, this rejection begins at home. Parents who should feel the natural bond of love and protection for their offspring instead find themselves uncomfortable around their own child. They cannot explain this discomfort, cannot rationalize it in any way that makes sense, but it is there nonetheless. A mother might find excuses not to hold her infant. A father might avoid spending time with his child, inventing reasons to be elsewhere, to be busy with other matters. Siblings sense the wrongness and avoid their brother or sister, or worse, torment them with a cruelty that goes beyond normal childhood bullying. In some cases, the rejection is immediate and fatal. Parents who give birth to a blank might experience such revulsion that they abandon the child, leaving it exposed to die. In more superstitious communities, the birth of a blank might be seen as a curse or an omen, and the infant is killed outright, either through direct violence or through exposure to the elements. The parents rationalize this murder, telling themselves that the child was cursed by the emperor, that it was touched by chaos, that it was better for everyone that the child did not survive. They do not understand that what they are killing is actually one of the most potent weapons against chaos that exists in the Imperium. Those blanks who survive infancy face a childhood of increasing isolation. In the confined environment of a family home, the parents and siblings might force themselves to tolerate the blank child's presence, but the discomfort never fades. Every interaction is strained, every conversation colored by an undercurrent of hostility that no one can quite explain. The blank child grows up knowing that something is wrong, that they are different, that they are somehow failing to be what a child should be, but they do not understand why. School, if the blank child is fortunate enough to attend one, becomes a fresh hell. Other children, lacking the self-control and rationalization abilities of adults, react to the blank with pure instinct. They avoid the blank child, refuse to play with them, make up cruel nicknames, and spread rumors. Teachers find reasons to exclude the blank from activities, to seat them apart from other students, to minimize the disruption their presence causes to the class. The blank child is blamed for this disruption, punished for causing problems that they do not understand and cannot control. As the blank grows older, the isolation deepens. Adolescence, that time when social bonds become crucial to development, when friendships and romantic relationships define so much of one's identity, is particularly cruel to blanks. They watch as their peers form connections, fall in love, create social, circles, and support networks. The blank remains apart, unable to participate in these fundamental human experiences. Any attempt to join in is met with rejection, sometimes polite, but more often cruel. Other adolescents sense the wrongness and respond with the vicious creativity that only teenagers can muster, finding 1,000 ways to make the blank's existence miserable. Romantic relationships are perhaps the cruelest impossibility for a blank. The biological urge for companionship and intimacy is just as strong in a blank as in any normal human, but the ability to fulfill that urge is severely compromised. Even if a blank can find someone who can tolerate their presence long enough to form an attraction, the fundamental wrongness never goes away. Physical intimacy does not create the connection or warmth that it should. The partner will always feel something is missing, something is wrong, even if they cannot articulate what that wrongness is. Relationships fail, not through lack of effort or compatibility, but because one partner is literally incapable of not feeling revulsion toward the other. In extremely rare cases, a blank might find another blank, someone who shares their condition and thus does not feel the same instinctive rejection. These pairings are the only way that the pariah gene continues to propagate through the human population, the only way that new blanks are born. But even these relationships are fraught with difficulties. Two voids existing together do not create warmth or connection. They create a deeper silence, a more profound isolation. The relationship might be bearable, might even be pleasant compared to the alternative of complete solitude, but it lacks the depth and richness that normal human relationships possess. The practical aspects of life are equally difficult for a blank. Finding employment is challenging when potential employers feel uncomfortable during the interview process, when co-workers consistently avoid you, when customers or clients find reasons to request service from someone else. Blanks often end up in occupations that require minimal human contact: sanitation workers, night shift laborers, positions where their wrongness can be tolerated because they are rarely seen. Some blanks become homeless, driven from stable employment and housing by the cumulative weight of constant rejection. In the sprawling underhives of imperial worlds, where millions exist in grinding poverty and lawlessness, blanks often gravitate to the deepest, darkest places, where human contact is minimal and survival depends on avoiding others rather than connecting with them. For those blanks who possess even a modicum of psychic sensitivity in those around them, the isolation is compounded by active hostility. In communities where psychers are common, even if unsanctioned and untrained, a blank's presence is not merely uncomfortable, but actively painful to those with the gift. Blanks in such communities are often killed, outright, murdered by angry mobs who cannot tolerate the agony that the blank's presence causes. The blank might not understand why they are being attacked, might not even know that they possess the pariah gene, but they die nonetheless, victims of their own biology. The psychological toll of this constant rejection cannot be overstated. Humans are social creatures. We need connection, need to feel that we belong, that we are part of something larger than ourselves. Strip away that connection, make it impossible to form meaningful relationships, and you create a kind of suffering that goes beyond mere loneliness. Blanks live with this suffering every day of their lives. They see connection all around them, see the warmth and camaraderie that normal humans take for granted, and know that they can never truly participate in it. Some blanks respond to this isolation by becoming withdrawn, by accepting their role as outcasts and learning to find contentment in solitude. They develop hobbies and interests that require no human interaction, find meaning in work or study that can be pursued alone. These are the survivors, the ones who adapt to their condition and make the best of an impossible situation. But adaptation does not mean happiness. It means learning to live with a pain that never truly fades, that colors every moment of existence with the knowledge that you are fundamentally alone in a universe full of beings who would, if given the choice, prefer that you did not exist at all. Other blanks respond with anger, with a burning resentment toward a universe that has rejected them through no fault of their own. These blanks might lash out at those around them, might become violent or cruel in response to the violence and cruelty they have experienced. They might seek to inflict pain on others as a way of externalizing the pain they carry within themselves. These are the blanks who confirm the worst fears of those who hate them, who become the monsters that society has always claimed they were. And then there are those blanks who simply give up, who decide that an existence defined by rejection and isolation is not worth continuing. Suicide rates among blanks, in those rare cases where such statistics are kept, are exponentially higher than among the general population. For every blank who survives to adulthood, for everyone who finds a way to live with their condition, there are dozens who decide that death is preferable to the endless loneliness that their life has become. In the context of the Imperium of man, where life is cheap and suffering is the common lot of humanity, the suffering of blanks might seem insignificant. After all, billions die in the Emperor's wars, trillions live in grinding poverty and oppression, entire worlds are consumed by xenos or chaos. What is the loneliness of one blank compared to such cosmic scale suffering? But it is precisely because life in the Imperium is so harsh, because human connection is one of the few sources of meaning and comfort available to the masses, that the blank's isolation is so terrible. They are denied the one thing that might make the horror of existence in the 41st millennium bearable, the knowledge that they are not alone, that they are part of something greater than themselves. This is the social reality of being a blank. This is the day-to-day existence that defines their lives from birth to death. They are surrounded by humanity, living among billions of their fellow humans, and yet they are more isolated than any hermit in the deepest wilderness, any prisoner in the most secure cell. They are alone in the crowd, invisible and yet impossible to ignore, hated not for what they do, but for what they are. And there is no cure, no treatment, no way to become normal. They can only endure, day after day, year after year, carrying the burden of their wrongness until death finally grants them whatever release awaits those who were rejected by the warp itself. The effect on others, being an abomination. If the life of a blank is defined by isolation and rejection, the experience of those who encounter a blank is defined by instinctive revulsion and fear. To understand what it truly means to be rejected by the warp, we must also understand how that rejection manifests in the perceptions and reactions of others, how the blank's anti-psychic nature creates ripples of discomfort and horror that spread outward from them, like waves from a stone thrown into still water. For normal humans, those with no psychic sensitivity beyond the minimal connection to the warp that all living beings possess, the presence of a blank manifests as an indefinable sense of wrongness. This is not a conscious perception. The person affected might not even realize that they are reacting to the blank's presence at all. Instead, they will find themselves uncomfortable, restless, eager to leave the area or end the conversation. They might attribute this discomfort to 1,000 different factors: the temperature of the room, a vague sense of illness, pressing business elsewhere, simple fatigue. But the real cause is the blank, and the void they create in the psychic fabric of reality. This wrongness operates on a level deeper than conscious thought. It is the part of the mind that evolved to detect predators, to sense danger before it becomes visible, to feel when something is amiss, even when all observable evidence suggests otherwise. When a normal human encounters a blank, this ancient warning system activates, flooding the body with stress hormones, triggering the fight or flight response, creating a sense of unease that cannot be rationalized or dismissed. The conscious mind scrambles to make sense of this alarm, to find a reason for the fear, and in doing so, often invents faults or flaws in the blank that justify the instinctive reaction. The blank might be perfectly polite, perfectly normal in every observable way, but the person encountering them will find things to dislike. Perhaps the blank speaks too loudly or too softly. Perhaps their hygiene is questionable, even if they are objectively clean. Perhaps there is something about their manner, their facial expressions, their body language that seems threatening or suspicious. These perceived flaws are the mind's attempt to rationalize an irrational fear, to provide a logical explanation for an emotional response that has no basis in observable reality. This rationalization can become deeply embedded, turning into prejudice and hatred that the person believes is justified and reasonable. In communities where a blank has lived for some time, where multiple people have experienced this instinctive reaction, rumor and speculation can create an entire mythology around the individual. They might be accused of being cursed, of bringing bad luck, of being in league with dark powers. Crimes might be attributed to them without evidence, misfortunes blamed on their presence, social problems explained as the result of their evil influence. The blank becomes a scapegoat, a focus for all the community's fears and anxieties, and the fact that there is no evidence of actual wrongdoing on their part only confirms the belief that they are somehow supernaturally clever in concealing their crimes. In extreme cases, this scapegoating can lead to mob violence. A community that has convinced itself that the blank is responsible for their problems might decide that the only solution is to drive the blank away or kill them outright. Lynch mobs form, weapons are gathered, and the blank is hunted down and murdered. The participants in this violence believe they are acting righteously, protecting their community from a genuine threat. They do not understand that the threat is imaginary, that the person they are killing is guilty of nothing more than existing with the wrong genetics. For psychers, the experience of encountering a blank is far more extreme and far less amenable to rationalization. Where normal humans feel vague discomfort and unease, psychers experience active pain and horror. The strength of this reaction depends on both the power of the psyker and the power of the blank. But even weak psychers will find the presence of even a weak blank to be deeply unpleasant. A sanctioned psyker, one who has been trained by the Adeptus Astra Telepathica and soul-bound to the Emperor, possesses the discipline and mental fortitude to resist the worst effects of proximity to a blank. They can force themselves to remain in the blank's presence through sheer willpower, can continue to function despite the pain and discomfort. But the cost of this resistance is high. The psyker must constantly fight against their instincts, must consciously override the screaming panic that tells them to flee or attack. Every moment in the blank's presence is an exercise in self-control, a battle against their own nature that leaves them exhausted and drained. For unsanctioned psychers, those who have not received training and do not possess the mental disciplines necessary to control their abilities, the presence of a blank can trigger immediate and violent reactions. The pain and horror override all rational thought, and the psyker lashes out, attempting to destroy the source of their agony. These attacks are not calculated or planned. They are purely instinctive, the thrashing of a wounded animal trying to eliminate a threat it perceives but cannot understand. If the blank survive such an attack, it is only because they are either fortunate enough to flee or because others intervene to stop the psyker. The nature of the pain that psychers experience in proximity to blanks is difficult for non-psychers to understand. It is not physical pain in the traditional sense, though it can manifest with physical symptoms. It is the pain of having a fundamental part of your being negated, of feeling your connection to the warp, to your own powers, to the very essence of what makes you psychic, being severed or suppressed. Imagine having a sixth sense that you have possessed since birth, and suddenly having that sense not just blocked, but actively torn away. The disorientation alone would be terrible, but beyond that is the existential horror of confronting something that should not be possible, that violates the fundamental rules of reality as you understand them. For particularly powerful psychers, those whose abilities have become integral to their sense of self, The presence of a powerful blank can create something approaching an identity crisis. When your entire life has been defined by your connection to the warp, when you have built your understanding of yourself around your psychic gifts, having those gifts suddenly negated can make you question everything about your existence. Who are you when your defining characteristic is stripped away? What are you if not a psyker? These questions might seem abstract and philosophical, but when asked in the presence of a blank, when the reality of your nature being negated is immediate and visceral, they become intensely personal and deeply terrifying. The relationship between the Culexus Temple and the other assassin temples of the Officio Assassinorum illustrates this dynamic perfectly. The Vindicar assassins, those master snipers who can kill from impossible distances, the Eversor assassins, those drug-fueled killers of inhuman speed and violence, the Calidus assassins, those masters of disguise and infiltration, all of these temples work alongside the Culexus, but they do not work with them willingly or comfortably. Every assassin from the other temples who has worked with a Culexus reports the same experience: profound discomfort, barely controlled fear, and a desperate desire for the mission to end so they can separate from their Culexus colleague. These are among the most highly trained and disciplined killers in the entire Imperium, individuals who face death with equanimity and carry out missions of terrible difficulty without hesitation, and yet they cannot overcome their instinctive reaction to the blank's presence. For demons and other entities of pure warp energy, the experience of encountering a blank goes beyond pain or discomfort into realms that might be called existential agony. Demons are beings that exist in the warp, that are composed of warp energy, given form and consciousness. They can manifest in the material realm, creating bodies for themselves from the stuff of reality, but their true existence is always in the immaterium. When a demon encounters a blank, it encounters a space where it cannot exist, where the warp is not merely absent, but actively negated. This creates in the demon something that approaches true fear, true pain, emotions that these creatures of crystallized emotion rarely experience in relation to themselves. The demon's perception of a blank has been described in various texts and testimonies as a hole in reality, a wound that will not close, a scream of silence that drowns out all sound. These metaphors attempt to capture the fundamentally incomprehensible nature of what the demon experiences. The blank is not simply dangerous to the demon the way a blessed weapon or a sanctified ward might be dangerous. The blank represents the possibility of non-existence itself, the threat of being unmade not through destruction, but through the simple fact that in the blank's presence, the demon cannot be. Most demons will flee from a blank if given the opportunity. They will abandon prey, retreat from battles they might otherwise win, accept temporary banishment back to the warp, anything to escape the agony of proximity to something so fundamentally antithetical to their nature. Those demons that cannot flee, that are bound by ritual or oath to remain in the blank's presence, experience what mortal observers have described as madness. The demon's form becomes unstable, flickering between shapes, unable to maintain coherence. It might attack the blank with suicidal fury, ignoring all self-preservation in a desperate attempt to destroy the source of its pain. Or it might simply dissolve, its connection to the material realm severed by the blank's anti-psychic field, sent screaming back into the warp, not through banishment, but through simple incompatibility with the local reality. Even the chaos gods themselves, those vast and terrible entities that dwarf individual demons the way stars dwarf planets, are not immune to the effects of sufficient concentrations of blanks. During the Horus Heresy, when the Sisters of Silence were gathered in great numbers on Terra, their combined null field was powerful enough to cast a shadow in the warp, to create a zone of nullification that blotted out even the Astronomicon. This terrified the powers that relied on the warp, including the navigator houses, whose entire existence depends on their ability to perceive the tides and currents of the immaterium. There were calls from various factions within the Imperium to have all blanks exterminated, to prevent the possibility that their collective power might cripple humanity's ability to travel the stars or communicate across the void. This fear of what blanks represent, this understanding that they are not merely unusual, but actively dangerous to the very foundations of the Imperium's power structure, colors all official interactions with them. When a blank is identified by the authorities, the decision of what to do with them is fraught with political and practical considerations. They are valuable, yes, as weapons against psykers and demons, but they are also threatening, not just to individual psykers, but to the entire system of warp-based travel and communication that holds the Imperium together. Too many blanks in one place could create catastrophic disruptions. Too powerful a blank in the wrong location could shut down vital warp-based systems. This is why the organizations that employ blanks, the Calexis Temple and the Sisters of Silence, operate under strict controls and limitations. The number of blanks they are allowed to recruit is carefully monitored. Their deployments are planned to minimize disruption to Imperial operations. They are never gathered in sufficient numbers to pose a threat to the greater infrastructure of the Imperium. They are weapons, valuable and necessary, but weapons that must be kept carefully controlled lest they cause more harm than good. In the end, the effect that blanks have on others is a reflection of their fundamental wrongness. They are rejected not because of their actions or their choices, but because of what they are. Every sentient being that encounters them, from the lowliest human to the mightiest demon, experiences some degree of revulsion or pain. This is not a failing of those beings. It is not cruelty or prejudice in the traditional sense. It is an instinctive reaction to something that violates the fundamental rules of existence, that exists in opposition to the very nature of consciousness and reality itself. The blank is an abomination, not through any moral failing, not through any choice they have made, but simply through the fact of their existence in a universe where everything else is connected to the warp, and they are not. Calexis assassins. Weaponized emptiness. If being a blank is to exist in a state of rejection and isolation, to be recruited by the Calexis Temple is to have that rejection transformed into a weapon of terrible power. The Calexis Temple is one of the 6 founding temples of the Officio Assassinorum, that ancient organization of killers who serve as the Emperor's instruments of personal vengeance and strategic elimination. But while the other temples recruit based on physical ability, mental acuity, or special skills, the Calexis Temple recruits based on a genetic anomaly that makes its members fundamentally wrong in the eyes of all living things. The process by which a blank becomes a Calexis assassin begins with identification. The Calexis Temple maintains a network of informants and agents across the Imperium, individuals who have been trained to recognize the signs of the pariah gene. When a potential candidate is identified, agents of the temple will investigate, observing the individual to confirm their status as a blank and assess their strength. Weak blanks, those at the Phi+ or Psi- level, are typically left alone, deemed unsuitable for recruitment. But those who display greater power, those whose anti-psychic presence is strong enough to be weaponized, are marked for acquisition. The acquisition itself is rarely voluntary. Most blanks have no idea what they are, know only that they are outcasts and misfits. When agents of the Calexis Temple arrive to collect them, they might resist, might flee, might fight. But resistance is futile. The temple has resources that no individual blank can match. And once they have been marked for recruitment, their previous life is effectively over. They will be taken to the temple's hidden fortress, a location so secret that even the Officio Assassinorum's own Grand Master knows only approximate coordinates. There, they will be transformed from outcast to weapon, from blank to Calexis. The training regimen of the Calexis Temple is brutal beyond description. The initiates are subjected to physical conditioning that would kill a normal human, psychic conditioning that would drive a weak-willed individual to madness, and indoctrination so complete that it erases almost all traces of their former identity. They are taught to embrace what they are, to take pride in the wrongness that once made them outcasts. They are shown the tactical value of their condition, taught to understand how their presence affects others and how to maximize that effect for strategic advantage. Physical training focuses on stealth and close combat. A Culexus assassin must be able to infiltrate secure locations, navigate hostile territory, and engage targets at close range with lethal efficiency. But the physical training is almost secondary to the psychic training, the education in how to use their anti-psychic nature as a weapon. Initiates are taught to control their null field, to expand it or contract it at will, to create zones of warp negation that can be used tactically. They are taught to recognize psykers at a distance, to assess their strength, to plan attacks that exploit the psyker's weaknesses. The signature weapon of the Culexus assassin is the animus speculum, a device that appears as a skull-faced helm, but is in reality a sophisticated psychic weapon. The animus speculum collects the anti-psychic energy that the Culexus naturally generates, stores it, and can release it in a focused beam of null energy that is lethal to psykers and demons. This beam does not kill in the traditional sense of inflicting physical damage, though it can certainly do that. Instead, it attacks the target's connection to the warp, severing the psychic link that sustains their powers and, in many cases, their life. For psykers, whose entire existence is bound up with their connection to the Imperium, this severance is death itself. For daemons, it is banishment and dissolution, a forced return to the warp that may take centuries to recover from. In addition to the animus speculum, Culexus assassins are equipped with other specialized weapons and tools. They carry psych-out grenades, devices filled with a substance created from the byproducts of the Emperor's psychic digestion of psyker souls, a material that causes intense pain and disorientation to any psyker in its area of effect. They wear suits of light, flexible armor that provides protection without impeding their mobility. They are trained in the use of conventional weapons as backup, though their primary role is always the elimination of psychic targets. The life of a Culexus assassin after their training is complete is one of isolation even more profound than what they experienced as outcasts. They are housed in special quarters within the temple, separate from other assassins, separate even from each other in many cases. They are deployed alone, sent on missions that require the unique abilities that only they possess. They interact with other members of the Officio Assassinorum only when absolutely necessary, and those interactions are always colored by the same instinctive revulsion that has defined their entire existence. But within the Culexus temple itself, among their fellow blanks, there exists something that approaches a sense of belonging. Here, for perhaps the first time in their lives, they are not wrong. They are not outcasts. They are weapons of the Emperor, valued for exactly the quality that made them hated everywhere else. This sense of purpose, this transformation from despised outcast to valued instrument, is what sustains most Culexus assassins through the horrors of their training and the loneliness of their service. The missions of a Culexus assassin are almost exclusively focused on the elimination of psychic threats. When a rogue psyker rises to power and creates a cult, when a demon prince manifests on an imperial world, when a chaos sorcerer leads a rebellion, the Officio Assassinorum sends a Culexus. These are targets that might be invulnerable to conventional assassination, protected by precognition or warp-based defenses, able to detect and destroy normal attackers before they can get close. But a Culexus is invisible to psychic perception, a void in the precognitive visions that might otherwise warn of danger. They can approach targets that no other assassin could reach, penetrate defenses that would stop any normal attacker. The psychological warfare aspect of the Culexus assassin's deployment is just as important as the physical elimination of the target. The mere knowledge that a Culexus is hunting you is enough to break the will of many psykers. The understanding that somewhere out there is a being that you cannot sense, cannot detect, cannot defend against using your psychic gifts, a being whose mere presence will strip away your powers and leave you helpless, creates a fear that goes beyond rational threat assessment. Psykers who know they are being hunted by a Colexus often make mistakes, become paranoid, turn on allies, self-destruct in ways that make the Colexus's job easier. When the Colexus finally strikes, the end is typically quick. The target, stripped of their psychic defenses, unable to sense the approach of their killer, has only moments to react. The animus speculum discharges, and the beam of anti-psychic energy severs the target's connection to the warp. For a powerful psyker, this severance is death itself. Their soul, so bright and so powerful in the Imperium, is cut off from its source of energy, and they expire instantly. For weaker psykers, the effect might not be immediately lethal, but it leaves them vulnerable to conventional weapons, and the Colexus is more than capable of finishing the job with blade or bolt. But the mission of a Colexus assassin is not always assassination. Sometimes they are deployed as bodyguards, protecting Imperial officials from psychic attack. Sometimes they serve as psychic dampeners, their presence preventing enemy psykers from using their powers during critical operations. Sometimes they are sent to investigate suspected psychic phenomena, their immunity to warp-based deception making them ideal for such work. In all these roles, they are alone, always separate from those they serve or protect, valued but never trusted, necessary but never welcome. The ultimate fate of a Colexus assassin, like all assassins of the Officio Assassinorum, is typically death in the field. They are sent on mission after mission, each one testing their skills and their luck, until finally they encounter an opponent they cannot defeat or a situation they cannot survive. There are no pensions for assassins, no retirement, no peaceful endings. They serve until they die, and when they fall, their bodies are recovered if possible, their gene seed harvested, their equipment recycled for use by the next generation of killers. But while they live, while they serve, the Colexus assassins are among the most feared and hated operatives in the entire Imperium. Even other members of the Officio Assassinorum, even the Grand Master who commands them, feel the same instinctive revulsion that all living beings experience in the presence of a blank. They are tolerated because they are necessary, employed because they are effective, but they are never liked, never accepted, never seen as anything other than the abominations they are. In accepting recruitment into the Colexus Temple, in embracing their nature as blanks, and allowing themselves to be transformed into weapons, these individuals make a choice that defines the rest of their existence. They trade the possibility of a normal life, however unlikely and however miserable that life might have been, for a purpose and a meaning that comes from service to the Emperor. They accept that they will never be loved, never be welcomed, never be seen as human by those around them. But in exchange, they become the Emperor's instruments against the greatest threat the Imperium faces, the powers of the warp itself. This is the life of a Colexus assassin, a life of isolation transformed into power, of rejection weaponized and directed at the enemies of mankind. They are the emptiness that devours light, the silence that drowns out sound, the void that swallows hope. They are necessary, and they are terrible, and they are perhaps the most tragic warriors in an Imperium that has no shortage of tragedy. Sisters of Silence, the Silent Sisterhood, where the Colexus assassins represent the individual weaponization of the blank condition. The Sisters of Silence represent its organized military application on a scale that has shaped the course of Imperial history. The Silent Sisterhood, also known as the Anathema Psychana, the Witch Seekers, and by a dozen other names both fearful and respectful, is an all-female military order composed entirely of blanks. Their history stretches back to the earliest days of the Great Crusade, when the Emperor first began his campaign to reunite the scattered remnants of humanity under a single banner. The exact origins of the Sisters of Silence are shrouded in mystery, as is appropriate for an organization that values secrecy and silence as core tenets. Some records suggest they emerged during the early years of the Great Crusade, when the increasing use of sanctioned psykers by the Adeptus Astra Telepathica revealed the need for a specialized force capable of hunting and controlling rogue psykers. Other, more fragmentary sources hint at origins that predate the Crusade, suggesting that the Sisterhood, or something very much like it, existed during the Age of Strife, perhaps even during the Dark Age of technology. What is certain is that by the time of the Great Crusade, the Sisters of Silence had become one of the Emperor's most trusted instruments. They operated from the Somnus Citadel on Luna, Earth's moon, and their primary mission was the enforcement of the Great Tithe, also known as the Psyker Cull. Every world in the Imperium was required to surrender a quota of psykers to the Black Ships, those dreaded vessels that would transport the psychically gifted to Terra for evaluation and training, or, for those deemed unsuitable, for feeding to the Emperor to sustain his existence on the Golden Throne. The Sisters of Silence were the enforcers of this tithe, the ones who hunted down psykers, who tried to hide or flee, who suppressed rebellions on worlds that refused to comply, who ensured that the flow of psychic talent to Terra continued uninterrupted. Unlike the Calexis assassins, who operate as individual agents, the Sisters of Silence are organized into military formations. They are divided into 3 chambers militant: the Chamber of Vigilance, which focuses on garrison duties and the suppression of psychic threats on Imperial worlds; the Chamber of Judgment, which serves as the main enforcement arm of the Tithe; and the Chamber of Oblivion, which specializes in the most dangerous operations against the most powerful psychic enemies. Each chamber has its own traditions, its own tactical specializations, and its own heraldry and honors. Recruitment into the Sisters of Silence follows a different pattern than recruitment into the Calexis Temple. While the Calexis seek out powerful blanks, regardless of their background, the Sisters maintain a more structured approach. They search across the Imperium for girls and young women who display the signs of the pariah gene, collecting them from wherever they might be found. The underhives of forge worlds, the aristocratic, families of noble houses, the frontier colonies on the edge of known space. These girls are brought to the Sisterhood's fortresses, where they are trained from youth in the arts of war and the duties of their order. The training of a Sister of Silence is comprehensive and brutal, though perhaps not quite as psychologically destructive as the training of a Calexis assassin. The initiates, called novices, are taught combat skills, weapon proficiency, tactical doctrine, and the use of their null field as both defense and offense. They learn the complex sign language that the Sisterhood uses for communication, a language that exists in several forms: thought mark for complex ideas and subtle communication, battle mark for clarity in combat, and Åskåda, a machine-readable version that can be interpreted by cogitators and servitors. At the heart of their training is the preparation for the Oath of Tranquility, the vow of silence that all full members of the Sisterhood must take. This oath is not simply a religious observance or a tactical choice. It is a fundamental commitment to their role as the Emperor's silent weapons against the psychic threats that imperil humanity. Once a novice takes the Oath of Tranquility, she will never speak again for the rest of her life. All communication will be through sign language, or, in rare cases, through intermediaries. This silence is both practical and symbolic, representing the void that they embody, the absence that they represent in a universe full of noise and psychic chatter. The Sisters of Silence are equipped with weapons and armor specifically designed to enhance their anti-psychic nature. They wear suits of ratine pattern armor, which provides excellent protection while maintaining mobility and flexibility. They are armed with a variety of weapons: bolt guns for ranged combat, power swords and other melee weapons for close quarters, flamers for suppressing large groups of enemies. But their most important weapon is, themselves, their null field, which they learn to project and control with increasing skill as they advance through the ranks. The tactical doctrine of the Sisters of Silence is built around their unique abilities. They serve as psychic dampeners on the battlefield, creating zones where enemy psykers cannot use their powers, where demons cannot maintain their manifestation, where the tides of the warp break and recede. They are deployed alongside conventional forces, often working with the Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's golden armored bodyguards, in operations where psychic threats are expected. This partnership between the Custodes and the Sisters is formalized in the concept of the Talons of the Emperor, with the Custodes representing the right hand and the Sisters the left. During the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, the Sisters of Silence played crucial roles in countless operations. They fought in the Webway War, that desperate conflict beneath the Imperial Palace where daemons sought to break through into the heart of terror itself. They accompanied the Space Marine legions on campaigns against psychic Xenos races and chaos-corrupted humans. They stood guard over the most dangerous psykers in Imperial custody, their presence preventing escape or possession. They were, in many ways, one of the most important military forces in the Imperium, though their contribution was often overlooked in favor of the more visible achievements of the Space Marines. But the aftermath of the Horus Heresy brought dramatic changes for the Sisters of Silence. In the paranoia and religious fervor that followed the Emperor's entombment on the Golden Throne, blanks became seen not as valuable tools, but as potential threats. The Silent Sisterhood was fragmented, with some members maintaining their traditional roles, while others were dispersed or went into hiding. For many centuries, the Sisterhood was believed to have been disbanded entirely, existing only in scattered enclaves and small groups that continued their mission without official support. It was not until the War of the Beast in the 32nd Millennium that the Sisters of Silence returned to prominence, their unique abilities crucial in defeating the massive Orc War that threatened terror itself. But even after this, they remained diminished, operating in the shadows, maintaining their traditions and their mission, but lacking the official status and resources they had possessed during the Great Crusade. The opening of the Great Rift and the return of Robert Guilliman in the 41st Millennium brought yet another change for the Sisters of Silence. Guilliman, recognizing the value of the sisterhood and understanding the threat posed by the resurgence of chaos, formally restored them to active duty as part of his Indomitus Crusade. New recruits were sought across the Imperium, new fortresses established, new fleets commissioned. The Silent Sisterhood was reborn, taking their place once more as one of the Emperor's primary weapons against the threats of the warp. For the individual Sister of Silence, life in the Sisterhood offers something that few blanks ever experience: a sense of belonging. Among their fellow sisters, they are not outcasts or pariahs. They are soldiers, warriors, members of an ancient and honored tradition. They are valued not despite their condition, but because of it. The very thing that made them hated and feared in their previous lives is what makes them valuable here. This sense of purpose, this knowledge that they are not alone in their wrongness, is what sustains many sisters through the hardships of their service. But the isolation never truly goes away. When a sister is deployed alongside normal Imperial forces, when she must interact with psykers or navigate the civilian population of an Imperial world, she still experiences the same rejection, the same instinctive fear and hatred from those around her. The oath of tranquility prevents her from explaining, from defending herself, from attempting to bridge the gap between herself and those who fear her. She can only endure, silently accepting the burden of being necessary but never welcome. The question of faith is complex for the Sisters of Silence. They do not worship the Emperor as a god, as the ecclesiarchy demands of all imperial citizens. They revere him as the greatest of men, the pinnacle of human achievement, but they stop short of declaring him divine. This places them in theological conflict with the dominant imperial cult, though their status as one of the talons of the Emperor provides them with protection from persecution. They are heretics in the eyes of the ecclesiarchy, but they are the Emperor's heretics, and thus untouchable. This theological stance reflects a deeper understanding that the Sisters of Silence have of their own nature. If the Emperor is divine, If he is a god who exists in the warp in some transcendent form, then what are they, who cannot touch the warp? Can they truly serve a god whose domain is the very thing they negate? The question has no easy answer, and different sisters have resolved it in different ways. Some maintain that the Emperor is not divine, that he is simply the greatest of humans, and thus accessible to them despite their condition. Others argue that the Emperor transcends the simple categories of divine and mortal, that he exists in both the warp and the materium simultaneously, and can thus be served by both psykers and blanks. Still others refuse to engage with the question at all, focusing instead on their duty and their mission, without concerning themselves with theological complexities. In the end, the Sisters of Silence represent one possible answer to the question of what it means to be rejected by the warp. They are blanks who have found purpose in their rejection, who have transformed their isolation into service, who have created a community of the outcast that provides meaning and belonging in a universe that would otherwise deny them both. They are warriors, sisters, the silent defenders of humanity against threats that most cannot perceive, and fewer still can fight. They are necessary, and they are honored, and yet they remain fundamentally separate from the species they protect, forever isolated by the very thing that makes them valuable. Notable blanks and their stories. While the Culexus Assassins and Sisters of Silence represent institutionalized responses to the blank condition, there are also individual blanks whose stories illuminate different aspects of what it means to be rejected by the warp. These are individuals who, through circumstance or choice, found themselves navigating the universe as blanks outside the structure of these organizations, who carved out their own places in an imperium that had no easy category for what they were. Perhaps the most famous blank in imperial history is Elizabeth Bequin, associate of Inquisitor Gregor Eisenhorn, and later leader of an organization of blanks called the Distaff. Bequin's story begins on the world of Bonaventure, where she was born in the early years of the 41st millennium. Like most blanks, she experienced a childhood of isolation and rejection, never understanding why everyone around her seemed to hate her for no reason she could discern. She drifted from place to place, from world to world, unable to maintain stable relationships or employment, always driven away by the instinctive revulsion her presence caused in others. By the time Eisenhorn encountered her, Bequin was working as a joy girl in a sundome on the world of hubris, a profession that speaks volumes about the limited options available to blanks. Even in a profession where emotional connection is not expected, where the transaction is purely commercial and temporary, she struggled. But she survived, and when Eisenhorn arrived hunting the mass murderer, Merdin Eichlone, she saved the Inquisitor's life by killing one of Eichlone's cultists who had the Inquisitor at a disadvantage. Eisenhorn, being a psyker himself, immediately recognized what Bequin was, though the recognition came with the same instinctive revulsion that all psykers experience in proximity to blanks. But Eisenhorn was also a man of tremendous willpower and discipline, and he understood the value of having a blank as part of his retinue. He recruited Bequin, offering her not just employment but a purpose, a role in the great work of protecting the Imperium from heresy and corruption. For Bequin, who had never experienced being valued for what she was rather than rejected because of it, this offer was transformative. As a member of Eisenhorn's team, Bequin proved herself repeatedly. Her immunity to psychic powers made her invaluable in investigations involving demonic corruption or psychic manipulation. Her ability to approach psychic targets without them sensing her presence made her an effective operative in situations where Eisenhorn himself would be immediately detected. And her blank nature protected her from possession, from psychic coercion, from all the myriad dangers of the warp that threatened others who worked in the dark corners of the Imperium. But Bequin's story is also a tragedy. The constant exposure to the horrors that Eisenhorn investigated, the violence and corruption and madness, took their toll. The isolation that came with being a blank was compounded by the isolation that came with being an inquisitorial acolyte, privy to secrets that could not be shared, witness to truths that could not be spoken. And when Eisenhorn began his descent into radicalism, when he started using the very tools of chaos that he had once fought against, Bequin found herself caught between loyalty to her employer and mentor and revulsion at the methods he had adopted. The culmination of Bequin's service to Eisenhorn came during the battle against the Chaos Titan Cruorvolt. In an attempt to use her blank nature as a weapon against the Titan's demonic essence, Bequin was subjected to stresses that no human mind should have to endure. She suffered a massive embolism, her brain hemorrhaging under the psychic feedback of trying to negate something as powerful as a Chaos Titan's warp core. She survived, but in a comatose state, her recovery not expected. She was placed in stasis, and the ship carrying her stasis tube later went missing during a routine warp jump. But the story of Elizabeth Bequin does not end there. Centuries later, a woman appeared on the world of Sancour who claimed to be Bequin, or rather, who bore Bequin's genetic signature but possessed no memory of her previous life. This Beta Bequin, as she came to be known, was revealed to be a creation of a mysterious organization called the Cognitae, a group that styled itself as a counter-inquisition. Whether Beta is a clone, a reincarnation, or something else entirely, remains a matter of speculation and mystery. But her existence raises profound questions about the nature of blanks and their relationship to concepts like soul, identity, and continuity of existence. Another notable blank is Ferric Jürgen, aide to the famous Commissar Chiaffas Kane of the 597th Valhallan Regiment. Jürgen represents a different type of blank experience, that of an individual who exists within the military hierarchy of the Imperial Guard, while possessing the pariah gene. Jürgen is described in Kane's memoirs as having terrible personal hygiene, a foul odor that Kane attributes to poor bathing habits, but which is more likely the rationalization that people around him create to explain the instinctive revulsion they feel in his presence. What makes Jürgen's case particularly interesting is that he seems unaware of his own nature as a blank. He functions as a loyal soldier and devoted aide to Kane, his blank abilities manifesting as apparent good luck that always seems to protect both himself and the Commissar from psychic threats. Demons that should have possessed or killed them are repelled by Jürgen's null field. Psychic attacks that should have succeeded fail in his presence. Kane, who is not a psyker and thus experiences only mild discomfort around Jürgen rather than the intense pain a psyker would feel, seems to attribute these fortunate occurrences to simple luck rather than to any special property of his aid. Jürgen's story illustrates how a blank might exist within the Imperium without ever being identified by the organizations that recruit them, how they might live their entire lives never understanding the true nature of what they are. It also shows how, in some contexts, the disadvantages of being a blank can be outweighed by the practical benefits, at least from the perspective of those around them. Kane values Jürgen despite the mild discomfort he causes, because Jürgen's loyalty and effectiveness as an aide more than compensate for the vague sense of wrongness that his presence creates. There are other blanks whose names appear in Imperial records, though their stories are less detailed. Iota, a so-called protophage blank manufactured by the Culexus Temple, was part of an execution force sent to assassinate Horus Lupercal during the Horus Heresy. The mission failed, but the fact that such a mission was attempted speaks to the value placed on blanks as weapons against even the most powerful enemies. Spear, the only product of the Black Pariah project, was so psychologically unstable that even the Culexus Temple abandoned him, and he was later captured by the Word-bearers and subjected to forced symbiosis with a demon, creating an abomination that combined the worst aspects of both blank and demon. What these stories share is the theme of blanks finding purpose through service, through being valued for the very quality that made them outcasts. Whether serving an inquisitor, a commissar, or the emperor himself through the Sisters of Silence, or the Culexus Temple, these individuals transformed their fundamental wrongness into an asset. They found roles where their immunity to psychic powers, their ability to negate the warp, made them not liabilities, but invaluable resources. But these stories also reveal the costs of such service. Bequin's ultimate fate, whether in her original incarnation or in the mysterious Beta, remains uncertain and likely tragic. Jurgen exists in a state of ignorance about his own nature, valued by Cain, but never truly understood or accepted. Iota died in service to a mission that was doomed from the start. Spear became a monster, his instability exploited by the forces of chaos to create something that was neither blank nor demon, but a horrific fusion of both. For every blank who finds purpose and value through service to the Imperium, there are countless others who die alone and unmourned, who never discover what they are, who are killed by frightened mobs or driven to suicide by the unbearable isolation of their existence. The famous blanks are famous precisely because they survived, because they found ways to navigate a universe that was designed to reject them. But they are exceptions, outliers in a broader pattern of suffering and loss that defines the existence of most blanks. The Necron connection and transformation. The relationship between blanks and the Necrons is one of the most disturbing and least understood aspects of the pariah gene. According to certain theories that have gained credence within the Mechanicus and the Inquisition, the very existence of human blanks is the result of ancient Necron genetic engineering, a seed planted millions of years ago that is only now bearing fruit. If this theory is correct, then every blank alive today is the product of a plan so old and so vast in scope that it predates human civilization itself. The war in heaven was a conflict of cosmic scale, fought between the godlike Old Ones and their servant races against the Satan and their Necron servants. It was a war where psychic power played a crucial role, where the Old Ones created new species specifically designed to fight with warp-based abilities, where the tides of the Imperium were weaponized on a scale never seen before or since. The Necrons, having traded their souls to the Satan in exchange for immortality in bodies of living metal, possessed no connection to the warp. They could not be affected by psychic powers in the way that other races could. But neither could they effectively counter those powers, could not create zones of warp negation or anti-psychic fields that would neutralize the advantages their enemies possessed. According to the theory, the Satan, specifically the Deceiver, developed a solution. They would create a genetic modification that could be introduced into organic species, a modification that would cause some individuals to be born without any connection to the warp, to exist as voids in the psychic fabric of reality. These individuals would be natural weapons against psychers, living zones of null space that could disrupt psychic powers and negate warp-based abilities. But the Satan did not want to create these anti-psychers among their enemies' current forces. Instead, they looked to the future, to a species that would one day spread across the galaxy and become numerous enough that even a rare genetic trait would produce useful numbers. They chose humanity. This choice might seem strange, given that during the war in heaven, humans were primitive creatures barely distinguishable from animals. But the Satan were capable of perceiving potential across vast spans of time, and they recognized in humanity a species that would survive the war in heaven, would evolve and spread, would eventually become numerous enough that a trait present in only 1 in a billion individuals would still produce millions of carriers. They abducted early humans, modified their genetics to include what would eventually be called the pariah gene, and released them back into the wild, allowing the trait to propagate through natural reproduction. The elegance of this plan, if it is indeed what happened, is remarkable. The Satan did not need to create blanks themselves, did not need to maintain a population of anti-psychers or deploy them directly. They simply needed to plant the seed and wait. Millions of years later, when humanity had spread across the galaxy, when psychic powers had become common among the species, the pariah gene would begin to manifest, creating individuals who could serve as natural counters to the very psychic abilities that the old ones had weaponized so effectively. But the Necrons did not simply plant the seed and abandon the project. In more recent times, they have shown an active interest in blanks, seeking them out and capturing them for purposes that remain unclear to Imperial observers. The process by which a Necron converts a human blank into a Necron pariah was documented in fragmentary form in old Imperial records before the law was revised in later editions. According to these accounts, the Necrons would subject captured blanks to the same biotransference process that had originally converted the Necrontyre into the Necrons, transferring their consciousness into bodies of living metal, while somehow preserving or enhancing their anti-psychic abilities. The resulting Necron pariahs were described as beings of terrible perfection, combining the deathless durability of Necron bodies with the warp-negating abilities of blanks. They radiated an aura of menace and wrongness even more powerful than that of living blanks, as if the transformation into undying metal had somehow concentrated and amplified the fundamental wrongness that the pariah gene created. These pariahs were deployed by the Necrons as shock troops against psychic enemies, their mere presence disrupting the psychic abilities that many races relied upon, their immunity to warp-based attacks making them nearly impossible to stop through conventional means. The fate of these Necron pariahs has been the subject of much speculation. Later editions of the lore removed them entirely, suggesting either that they were never as common as initial reports suggested, or that the Necrons abandoned the project for reasons of their own. But the older lore provides chilling details about specific cases. Thomas Maccabee, for example, was a Guevesa archaeologist on the Tau world of Cronus, who unwittingly awakened a Necron tomb and was captured and converted into a Necron pariah. His transformed form served as an advisor and spokesman for the otherwise silent Necron lord. His human knowledge and speech capabilities, combined with his new Necron body and amplified blank abilities, creating a being that was neither fully human nor fully Necron. For a human blank to undergo such transformation must be the ultimate violation. To have one's consciousness ripped from one's body and imprisoned in a deathless shell of living metal, to have whatever limited connection to humanity one possessed severed completely, to become a monster in service to an alien intelligence that cares nothing for human life or dignity. This is horror on a scale that transcends mere death. And yet, in a dark irony, the transformed pariah gains something that they never possessed in life. They become completely immune to the instinctive rejection that defined their existence as a living blank. The Necrons themselves feel nothing in proximity to a pariah, having no souls to react to the void that the pariah creates. For the first time in their existence, the transformed blank exists among beings who do not hate or fear them, though this acceptance comes at the cost of everything that made them human. The question of whether the Necrons are still actively pursuing the creation of pariahs remains open. If the pariah gene was indeed their creation, then they presumably retain the ability to identify carriers and the knowledge of how to transform them. Imperial forces have encountered Necrons capturing human populations, and it is possible that among those captured are blanks who are subjected to this transformation. But the purposes of the Necrons remain inscrutable to human understanding, and whether they continue to value blanks as useful resources or have abandoned that project in favor of other pursuits is unknown. What is clear is that the Necron connection to blanks, whether real or theoretical, adds another layer of horror to the existence of those who possess the pariah gene. It suggests that their very nature might be the result of alien manipulation, that they are not natural mutations, but engineered weapons created by inhuman intelligences for purposes that had nothing to do with human welfare. It raises the possibility that somewhere in the galaxy, ancient Necron tomb worlds hold knowledge about the pariah gene that far exceeds anything the Imperium has managed to discover. And it suggests that, for blanks, the fate of being captured by the Necrons might be even worse than the isolation and rejection they experience in human society. The question of the afterlife. One of the most profound and troubling questions about blanks concerns what happens to them after death. In the universe of Warhammer 40,000, the afterlife is not a matter of faith or speculation, but a documented reality. When a normal human dies, their soul enters the warp, where it is typically consumed by the chaotic energies that churn through that realm. For psykers, the death is even more certain. Their bright souls are immediately visible to every demon and predator in the Imperium, and they are devoured almost instantly. The Aeldari know this fate well, which is why they use spirit stones to trap their souls at the moment of death, protecting them from Slaaneish's eternal hunger. But what happens when a blank dies? They are described as soulless, as possessing no presence in the warp, as existing in a state of fundamental disconnection from the Imperium. Does this mean they simply cease to exist at death? That there is no afterlife, no continuation of consciousness, only oblivion? Or does it mean something else, something stranger and more difficult to comprehend? The theological debates around this question have consumed scholars and priests for millennia. The common understanding is that blanks are soulless, that the pariah gene somehow prevents the formation of a soul or destroys the soul that would otherwise exist. But this understanding is challenged by various sources of evidence and theory. During the Horus Heresy, Lorgar was told by the demon Ingathal, the Ascended, that all life in the Materium is born ensouled, that to exist as a living, conscious being is to possess a soul by definition. If this is true, then blanks must have souls, despite their lack of presence in the warp. One theory that attempts to reconcile these contradictory pieces of evidence is that blanks do possess souls, but their souls are fundamentally different from those of normal humans. Instead of projecting into the warp, creating a presence in the Immaterium that can be perceived and interacted with, the blank's soul somehow inverts, creating a negative presence, a void that actively repels the warp rather than connecting to it. This would explain why blanks affect the warp. If they had no souls at all, if they were truly absent from the Immaterium, they would have no effect on it, no interaction with it whatsoever. But blanks do affect the warp. They create zones of negation. They disrupt psychic phenomena. This suggests that they possess something, some essence or presence, that interacts with the warp, even if that interaction takes the form of repulsion rather than connection. The analogy that is sometimes used is that of a black hole compared to a star. A star radiates light and heat, creating a positive presence that can be perceived from vast distances. A black hole creates a different kind of presence, a gravitational well so deep that not even light can escape. A void that can only be detected by observing how it affects the space around it. Both are real. Both have measurable effects on their environment, but their nature is fundamentally different. If normal souls are stars, bright presences in the warp that radiate psychic energy, then blank souls might be black holes, presences that devour rather than emit, that pull inward rather than radiating outward. If this theory is correct, then what happens when a blank dies is not oblivion, but something stranger. Their soul, their void essence, would be released from the physical constraints of their body and would enter the warp as a kind of anti-soul, a bubble of null space in the roiling chaos of the Immaterium. What would such an entity experience? Could it maintain consciousness without the anchor of a physical body? Would it simply dissipate, its null nature unable to maintain coherence in an environment composed entirely of psychic energy? Or would it persist in some form, a wandering void in the warp that demons would flee from and psykers would be unable to perceive? Another possibility, suggested by some sources, is that blanks simply cease to exist at death, that their unusual nature prevents them from entering the warp in any form. Their consciousness would simply end, extinguished like a candle flame, with no continuation, no afterlife, no possibility of any existence beyond the physical. This would be both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because it would mean they could never be consumed by demons or tortured in the warp. A curse because it would mean that they alone among all sentient beings are denied any form of continuation after death. The question of whether blanks can be brought back from death through psychic means or soul binding is also unclear. The Emperor, at the height of his power, could read the minds of even the most powerful blanks, including members of the Sisters of Silence. This suggests that despite their lack of presence in the warp, they still possess something that can be perceived and interacted with by a being of sufficient power. If the Emperor could perceive their thoughts, could he also perceive their souls? Could he intervene at the moment of their death to preserve them in some form? The practical implications of these questions are significant for the Sisters of Silence and the Culexus Temple. If blanks have no afterlife, if death means absolute cessation of existence, then their service takes on an even more profound weight. They sacrifice not just their lives, but any possibility of continuation beyond life, any chance of reward or rest in an afterlife. They fight and die knowing that there is nothing waiting for them beyond, that their sacrifice earns them only oblivion. On the other hand, if blanks do possess souls of some kind, if they do enter the warp in some form after death, then what becomes of them there? Are they tormented by demons, or are they immune to such torment by virtue of their nature? Do they find some form of peace, or do they wander eternally in a realm that is fundamentally hostile to their existence? These questions have no definitive answers, and different blanks have come to different conclusions about what awaits them. Some blanks find comfort in the possibility of absolute oblivion after death. For individuals whose entire lives have been defined by isolation and suffering, the promise of simply ceasing to exist might seem like a welcome release. No more pain, no more rejection, no more consciousness to suffer with, just the end, final and absolute. This philosophy leads some blanks to embrace death without fear, to face the end of their existence with something approaching relief. Others hold to the hope that they do possess souls, that they will enter the warp and find some form of continuation. They might believe that the Emperor, in his infinite power and compassion, will protect them, will shelter their null souls from the predators of the Imperium. Or they might believe that their very nature, the wrongness that defined their mortal existence, will protect them in death as it did in life, that demons will flee from their presence even after their physical form has perished. Still others refuse to engage with the question at all, focusing instead on their duty and their service, without concerning themselves with what might come after. For these blanks, the uncertainty about the afterlife is just one more burden to bear, one more mystery that cannot be solved through understanding or faith. They serve because they must, because it is their purpose, and what comes after is irrelevant to the work that must be done now. The truth, if there is a single truth that applies to all blanks, remains unknown. The nature of the blank soul, the fate of blanks after death, the relationship between their physical existence and whatever spiritual essence they might possess, all of these are questions that the Imperium's greatest minds have failed to answer definitively, and perhaps that is appropriate. Perhaps beings who are rejected by the warp in life should remain mysteries even in death, their final fate as unknowable as the source of their condition. Living between two worlds. To be a blank is to exist perpetually between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. They are human in body, possessing all the biological characteristics of their species, feeling pain and pleasure, hunger and thirst, fear and hope. But they are denied the fundamental connection to the warp that makes the human experience complete, that binds individuals together in an invisible web of consciousness and emotion. They are part of humanity, and yet fundamentally separate from it, forever isolated by a genetic quirk they did not choose and cannot change. This state of being between worlds manifests in countless ways throughout a blank's life. In moments of crisis, when normal humans instinctively reach out for connection with others, when they seek comfort in community and shared experience, the blank remains apart. They can see the bonds that form between other people, can observe the warmth of friendship and the depth of love, but they cannot truly participate in these connections. Every relationship is colored by the fundamental wrongness that their presence creates, every bond strained by the instinctive rejection that they inspire in others. Yet blanks are not emotionless automatons. They feel the full range of human emotions, experience joy and sorrow, love and hate, hope and despair. The debate over whether soullessness means emotional emptiness has raged for centuries among Imperial scholars. But the lived experience of blanks makes the answer clear. They are as emotionally complex as any normal human, perhaps even more so given the intensity of the isolation they experience. The soul and emotions are not the same thing. Consciousness and feeling do not require a connection to the warp, though that connection might enhance or deepen the experience in ways that blanks can never know. This emotional richness combined with social isolation creates a particularly cruel form of suffering. To feel love, but be unable to inspire it in return. To desire friendship, but watch potential friends instinctively draw away. To yearn for acceptance, but know that you will never truly be accepted. This is the daily reality of a blank's existence. They are not numb to their rejection. They feel it acutely, perhaps more acutely than a normal person could, because they have no respite from it, no moments of genuine connection to balance the isolation. Some blanks develop coping mechanisms that allow them to function despite this isolation. They learn to find satisfaction in solitary pursuits, in hobbies and interests that require no human interaction. They become experts in fields that value individual achievement over collaboration. They find meaning in service to causes or ideas rather than in relationships with people. These adaptations are not signs of emotional emptiness, but rather demonstrations of remarkable resilience, of the ability to find purpose and meaning in an existence that provides none of the social rewards that normal humans take for granted. The relationship between blanks and faith is particularly complex. The imperial cult demands devotion to the emperor as a god, requires regular participation in religious ceremonies, expects displays of piety and communion with the divine. But for a blank, whose very nature negates the warp where the emperor's psychic essence presumably resides, faith becomes problematic. Can they truly worship a god whose domain they cannot touch? Can they pray to a deity who exists primarily in a realm they are cut off from? Can they experience the divine presence that faithful imperial citizens claim to feel during moments of religious ecstasy? Different blanks have found different answers to these questions. Some become deeply religious, finding in faith a connection to something larger than themselves that does not depend on psychic presence or warp-based communion. They argue that the emperor transcends the simple categories of material and immaterial, that he can be worshipped and served regardless of one's connection to the warp. Their faith becomes a matter of choice and will rather than feeling or mystical experience, a deliberate commitment to an ideal rather than an emotional response to divine presence. Others reject religion entirely, viewing it as yet another aspect of human experience from which they are excluded. If the divine is fundamentally connected to the warp, if communion with the emperor requires psychic sensitivity, then they are cut off from the spiritual dimension of existence, just as they are cut off from the social dimension. This rejection can become a source of additional isolation, particularly in a theocratic society like the Imperium, where religious devotion is not optional but mandatory. The few blanks who find companionship with other blanks discover that even this connection is limited. Two voids cannot create warmth. Two silences cannot make conversation. The relationship might be more bearable than solitude, might provide some measure of comfort in the shared understanding of what it means to be rejected, but it lacks the depth and richness that connection between normal humans can achieve. Blank partnerships are often described as more pragmatic than emotional, more about mutual survival than about love or intimacy. For blanks in the service of the Imperium, whether as Culexus assassins, Sisters of Silence, or inquisitorial acolytes, the tension between being human and being blank takes on additional dimensions. They are weapons, tools to be deployed against psychic threats, valued for their utility rather than their humanity. But they are also individuals with hopes and dreams, fears and desires, the same complex inner lives that all humans possess. Reconciling these two aspects of their existence, the tool and the person, the weapon and the self, is an ongoing struggle. Some find meaning in embracing their role as weapons, in accepting that their value to the Imperium lies in their utility rather than their humanity. They submerge their individual identity in their function, becoming the perfect instrument of the Emperor's will. This can provide a sense of purpose, but it comes at the cost of denying much of what makes them human, reducing themselves to a single characteristic, a single use. Others resist this reduction, insisting on maintaining their individuality even while serving in roles that demand they be nothing more than tools. They cultivate interests beyond their assigned duties, maintain whatever relationships they can despite the difficulties, hold on to their sense of self in the face of pressures to become nothing more than living weapons. This resistance requires tremendous strength and often leads to conflict with their superiors, who prefer compliant tools to complicated individuals. The question of identity becomes particularly fraught for blanks who have been recruited into service from civilian life. Who were they before they became Culexus assassins or Sisters of Silence? What did they dream of being? What lives did they imagine for themselves before their condition was identified and weaponized? The training and indoctrination processes of these organizations deliberately suppress these memories and aspirations, encouraging recruits to abandon their civilian identities and embrace their new roles completely. But for many blanks, fragments of their former selves persist, creating an internal conflict between what they were and what they have been made to become. In rare moments, blanks experience something that approaches genuine acceptance. An extremely empathetic individual might be able to overcome their instinctive revulsion through sheer force of will and compassion, might consciously choose to see the person rather than reacting to the wrongness. These moments are precious beyond measure to blanks, brief glimpses of what their existence might be like if their condition did not inspire such automatic rejection. But these moments are rare and fleeting, islands of acceptance in an ocean of isolation. The ultimate tragedy of the blank condition is that it is permanent and unchangeable. There is no cure, no treatment, no way to become normal. A blank will remain a blank for their entire life, from birth to death, carrying the burden of their wrongness through every moment of their existence. They cannot choose to be different. They cannot earn acceptance through good behavior or achievement. They simply are what they are, and what they are is fundamentally rejected by the universe itself. And yet, despite all this, blanks endure. They survive. They find ways to navigate a world that does not want them, to create meaning in lives defined by isolation, to serve purposes that value them even while fearing them. They are proof that human resilience can overcome even the most profound forms of rejection, that consciousness can persist and even thrive in circumstances that would seem to make existence unbearable. Conclusion: the burden of necessary wrongness. To be rejected by the warp is to carry a burden that most humans cannot imagine and few could endure. It is to wake each morning knowing that everyone you encounter will instinctively hate you, that every interaction will be colored by fear and revulsion, that you will live and die alone regardless of how many people surround you. It is to possess the same capacity for love, friendship, and connection as any normal human, but to be denied the ability to fulfill those capacities, to watch others experience the warmth of human contact while remaining forever on the outside. Blanks do not choose their condition. They are born with the pariah gene, victims of a genetic quirk that might be the result of ancient Necron manipulation or simple random mutation. They do not ask to be abominations. They do not desire to inspire fear and revulsion in all living things. They are simply trying to survive, to find meaning and purpose in an existence that offers them little of either. And yet, for all their suffering, for all the horror of their isolation, blanks serve a crucial purpose in the Imperium of man. In a galaxy where chaos lurks in every shadow, where demons seek constantly to break through into real space, where psychers can become doorways for horrors beyond mortal comprehension, the blank is humanity's most reliable defense. They cannot be corrupted by chaos, cannot be possessed by demons, cannot be manipulated or deceived through psychic means. They are immune to the most insidious threats the Imperium faces, living shields against the powers of the warp, the Munt. Culexus assassins eliminate threats that no other warrior could approach. The Sisters of Silence maintain order among the psyker population and protect the Imperium from demonic incursion. Individual blanks serving as inquisitorial acolytes or bodyguards provide protection against psychic attack that no amount of training or technology can match. Without blanks, the Imperium would be even more vulnerable to the threats of chaos than it already is. Without blanks, countless worlds would fall to demonic possession. Countless citizens would be killed or corrupted by rogue psychers. Countless campaigns would be lost to the psychic powers of the Imperium's enemies. This creates a terrible irony at the heart of the blank condition. They are necessary. The Imperium needs them, depends on them, could not function without them. And yet, they are hated and feared by the very civilization they protect. They are outcasts who serve as defenders, pariahs who act as shields, abominations who stand between humanity and the abyss. Their very existence is a paradox, necessary and intolerable, valuable and wrong, all at the same time. For the blank themselves, finding meaning in this paradox is the work of a lifetime. Some embrace their role as weapons, finding purpose in service, even if that service never brings acceptance or love. Others resist being reduced to tools, insisting on maintaining their humanity even while acknowledging their inhumanity. Still others simply endure, day by day, moment by moment, carrying their burden because there is no alternative, because to give up would be to let the isolation win. The question of whether it is better to be a blank or never to have existed at all is one that each individual must answer for themselves. Some might argue that any existence is preferable to non-existence, that even a life defined by isolation and suffering is still a life worth living. Others might argue that the suffering is too profound, the isolation too complete, to make existence worthwhile. There are no easy answers, no universal truths that apply to all blanks. There is only the reality of their condition and the choices they make in response to it. In the end, the story of the blank is a story about what it means to be human in the most fundamental sense. It is about consciousness confronting its own isolation, about individuals seeking meaning and purpose in circumstances that seem designed to deny both. It is about resilience in the face of rejection, about finding reasons to continue when every instinct screams for surrender. It is about the terrible price that some must pay so that others can survive, about the sacrifices made by those who are valued for their utility, but never for their humanity. To be rejected by the warp is to exist in a state that should not be possible, to survive conditions that should not be survivable, to find purpose in a universe that offers none. It is to be necessary and wrong, valued and hated, human and other, all at once. It is to carry a burden that most cannot comprehend, and to do so knowing that there will be no reward, no recognition, no moment of genuine acceptance in return, and yet blanks endure. They survive. They serve. They are proof that even the most profound rejection cannot entirely destroy the human spirit, that consciousness can find meaning even in meaninglessness, that existence can persist even when existence itself seems like a mistake. They are the void that protects against the void, the silence that drowns out the screaming of demons, the emptiness that stands between humanity and annihilation. This is what it means to be rejected by the warp in Warhammer 40,000. This is the life of the blank, the pariah, the untouchable. This is the story of those who are born wrong and must find a way to make that wrongness right, who are hated and must find a way to be valuable, who are alone and must find a way to serve. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war and the laughter of thirsting gods, the blank stands apart from both, rejected by the universe itself but refusing to disappear, enduring because they must, serving because they can, existing because to do otherwise would be to admit defeat. They are necessary, they are wrong, they are human, and they are alone. This is their story, and it is a story worth remembering, even if those who live it can never truly be understood by those who do not share their condition. May they find whatever peace is available to those who are rejected by the warp, and may their service be honored, even if their existence cannot be accepted. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the horrifying isolation of being a blank in Warhammer 40K, please like this video and subscribe to Stories of Hammer for more atmospheric explorations of the 41st Millennium's darkest corners. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts on the blank condition, and check out the rest of our channel for more deep lore dives into the grim darkness of the far future.